Hello, my friends, Evolutionary Energy Arts family. So, guys, for me, I see all that's going on here, especially in regards to what we're looking at right here. And it is a chilling reminder of what could be coming. Russia adds more than 1 million ounces of gold to the country's vast stockpile. You know, when people buy gold and silver, for instance, it's a hedge. It's a hedge against rough times. It's a hedge against trouble and war and insecurity because gold and silver, they always hold value. And that's just a fascinating thing to think about in reality. And, when we look at the Anunnaki legends, why'd they come here? They came here to mine for gold. And what do we find in South Africa? And all throughout lower Africa, we find ancient mines where people were buying, were basically digging for gold. Gold has an intrinsic value, and so does silver. And just getting a little off topic here, but colloidal silver is so potent and so healthy. And personally, I feel that the warnings that people say, oh, you could turn blue if you use too much. I'm not really buying it anymore. I think a lot of things we were being told to get us in the wrong direction and get us thinking that maybe some things that are not dangerous to us are dangerous, and things that are dangerous to us are not dangerous to us. We know there's bigger purposes going on out there, bigger agendas. We know it. We see it. We're waking up to it. But getting back to this, Russia is getting out of the dollar big time. And so when you look at what has to happen in order for there to be like true conflict on a big scale, one of the things would be Russia, China, and their allies pulling away from the U.S.'s fiscal system, financial system, the system that's been set up and been so dominant in this world. So the Central Bank of Russia boosted foreign exchange reserves by 31.1 tons of gold in February, raising holdings of the precious metal to 2,149 tons, according to the foreign reserve data updated by the regulator. Gold reserves grew by 1.5% against the previous month. The value of the gold reserves reportedly increased 2.4% to 91.642 billion, accounting for 19% of Russia's foreign reserves. Over the first 2 months of the current year, the regulator purchased 1.2 million ounces, or 37 tons of the precious metal, with the monetary value of gold reserves jumping 5.5%. The move reflects Russia's commitment to previously declared policy of diversification of international holdings to keep them safe from various risks. Russia's central bank has been actively buying gold since 2014, when the U.S. and European Union introduced their first economic sanctions against the country. The regulator reportedly purchased over 1,000 tons, 34.6 million ounces of the precious metal by the end of 2018. Russia has also opted to move away from its reliance on the U.S. dollar, having slashed the share of greenback in its foreign reserves to historic lows over the recent years. Moreover, the country started unprecedented dumping of U.S. treasuries over a year ago after political tensions between Moscow and Washington significantly intensified. The massive $81 billion sell-off came amid U.S. sanctions targeting Russian businessmen, companies, and government officials. And if we look at how the trend has been going, this is from back in January. Putin pushes to dump dollar, proves hard sell with Russia Inc. This has been ongoing. This has been building. De-dollarization accelerating as central banks are dumping the U.S. dollar. The U.S. dollar hasn't lost its king status yet, but its influence is surely wearing off. De-dollarization has already been in action for quite some time now, as global geopolitical space is divided into two camps. One who supports U.S. currency as a gold reserve tool, and the other ones that have turned their backs on the greenback. Countries like China, Russia, India, Iran, and Turkey are among others that have taken steps towards ending the US dollar monopoly. Now the dollar's share in global central bank reserve is also taking a hit as it slumped to the lowest level since 2013, while the Chinese yuan has risen significantly. So obviously, we could see how it's going. Russia and China are tied at the hip. According to the IMF's currency composition of official foreign exchange reserves, for quarter 4 2018 report, the U.S. currency share went down from 61.9 to 61.7% in the fourth quarter, marking the 10th decline in the past 12 quarters. Meanwhile, the euro, yen, and yuan each gained the share in allocated reserves. And so the drop in the U.S. dollar reserves in quarter 4 was equivalent to just above $50 billion in dollar reserves sold, as per Goldman calculations. So while U.S. dollar reserve is on the decline, reserve managers continue to add euro reserves that have increased by 0.2% this quarter. Despite the growing political and growth concerns, reserve managers are offsetting a weaker euro. And so, the yuan and the yen are rising as we look here. And, dumping dollar and hoarding gold. That's what's going on here. And dumping dollar, hoarding gold. And as we look at this too, Russia buys quarter of world yuan reserves and shift from dollar. The beginning of the end of SWIFT. Russian banks join Chinese alternative global payments system. As we can see here, and as we were saying, buying gold at the fastest pace in decades. The writing is on the wall, in the painfully strained U.S.-Russian relations. And so, Russia is cutting its ties with the Western financial system, which, is cabal dominated, and we know that. We see this. But it's also part of the bigger plan. And this is something that has been talked about and something that has to take place before they could have a greater conflict. And that's what the risk really is here, because this is part of what happens before you have a large-scale conflict going. And, many might not see it or might not want to see it. We were having dinner with a good friend yesterday, and we just disagree on this because, my gut has been telling me that the powers that be want another global conflict. And, the friend just thinks that it's not going to happen. It can't happen. It's just something that won't happen. And I totally disagree, because we've had global conflicts before, and, we see how profitable they could be. And what's going to stop it is enough people waking up and saying, hey, what's going on here? Stop this. We see what you're doing. Why Russia is dumping dollars and buying gold at the fastest pace in decades. 9 months ago, as U.S. Treasury yields were drifting lower from a 7-year high reached in May of last year, we pointed out a curious development in the market for U.S. sovereign debt that, to our complete lack of surprise, had been nearly overlooked by the mainstream financial presses. In April and May, Russia's central bank liquidated $81 billion in treasuries, nearly its entire holdings. The drop was so significant that Russia fell off the Treasury's list of 30 or so largest treasury holders. And the months that have followed, the U.S. has imposed more economic sanctions and feuded with Putin over the fate of Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro. Vladimir Putin has turned instead to alternative reserves as the country's de-dollarization push continued. Over the same period of time, Russia was a conspicuously large buyer of Chinese yuan, as Goldman Sachs noted, and as we highlighted well earlier today, helping contribute to a spike in yuan buying by reserve managers last year, as the IMF pointed out in a recent report. Look at that. Look at this. Oh, does that not tell you something? Look at that chart. One side dropping off the cliff, the other one going straight up the cliff. So this is a huge shift. And to me, This portends global conflict. That's what I see being planned here when we look at this. It's basically the Cold War getting very, very hot, and just the likelihood of it getting hot. As we've talked about Albert Pike, and we've talked about Albert Pike back in 1871 saying that the elite of the world have 3 world wars planned. And, we have 2 down, so there's 1 to go. This is what they have planned. This has been their plan the whole time. And so after the devastation that would ensue following this conflict, what you're going to have left is a complete power shift to the east, which has been part of what the elite have been planning the whole time. And the Chinese system that we see with the social credit scores, with the re-education camps, that's what's in store for the rest of the world that escapes this huge conflict that they have planned. That's what's going to be in store. A complete lockdown, 100% Orwellian system. Complete lockdown, no more freedoms left at all. That's their vision, because ultimately, the puppet masters controlling all this are less than 0.5% of the population. And so the biggest threat to their plans in many ways lies with the people of the USA, because the USA is not, there's 327 million people, and there's over 400 million guns in this country. So there is power in the hands of the people here, if they were to wake up and to say no. So part of the plans is eliminating that threat. And so that's what I've honestly always felt. And, that's just the vibe I've had. This is just, through the dreams and the meditations, the visions that have come up over my lifetime, which goes back to when I was a teenager. I've always had that feeling that this was in store, even before I started to research all this. And I do think it's part of their plan, but I do think we have the power to derail this. And it's simply by sharing the knowledge, letting people know what's going on. We got to get out there and demand that this doesn't happen again. There were protests in Vietnam, or in the streets of America when the Vietnam War came, and we were talking about that last night as well. And obviously they didn't stop the war. So what it's going to take is it's going to take people in the militaries to say no and recognize the bigger picture. Because there's so much profit in war. And it's also a way to control populations, and it's also a way to implement new restrictions on freedoms. So we have to recognize what's going on here. This is a huge, huge wake-up call. The bell is ringing. The bell is ringing. We have to wake up and see what's going on here. Because, Russia and China would have to have their other system, another alternative system in place before there ever really was any sort of conflict. And we talked about Russia wanting to basically separate their internet from the internet. And that is something else that would be done in order to better secure their communications and their internet, their people, if there was a bigger conflict going on. And so, this is something, again, that's a disconcerting thing to look at. And it's influencing, as it says here, it's influencing leaders of states that are still at least nominally friendly towards the U.S. And so, you've seen that. We've seen now Italy make a deal with China. And so things are breaking down. The EU is breaking down. And I think that is pretty obvious as we see everything going on. And we have Beijing ordering 200 ships to the Spratley Islands, provoking panic in Manila. What appears to be Beijing's latest military flex in the South China Sea, the contested collection of shoals and reefs that play a crucial role in global trade and also contains vast untapped gas reserves, has reportedly set off alarm bells in Manila just as the Philippines and U.S. were preparing to begin a round of military drills. According to Bloomberg, Philippines personnel have lodged a complaint with the Joint Chinese-Filipino Commission created to resolve disputes in the region after authorities counted a mass of 200 Chinese ships around Thitu, the second largest island in the Spratley Islands. With the trade deal still in limbo, military tensions in the South China Sea have intensified as the Navy has stepped up, the U.S. Navy has stepped up the pace of its freedom of navigation operations, while Beijing has stepped up its threatening rhetoric towards Taiwan and carried out more military drills. A Philippine official said the ships appear to be part of China's sea militia. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte's spokesman Salvador Panelo said he would meet China's ambassador and ask for an explanation of the bolstered presence after the Philippine Foreign Affairs Department lodged its protest with the committee. And we're seeing the area right there. So Philippine soldiers will continue their patrols in the disputed area. Military Chief General Benjamin Madrigal Jr. told reporters separately, adding that Chinese fishing vessels have repeatedly been spotted near the island. He urged a panel with representatives from both nations tasked with resolving South China Sea disputes to address the Chinese presence in the area. This is a concern not only for the military, but for other agencies as well, including the Coast Guard. We're looking for ways to address this. Before Duterte came to power and opted for warmer ties with Beijing, Manila won a case in the ICC validating its claim to sovereignty over most of the South China Sea. However, Beijing has ignored this ruling and faced zero repercussions for doing so. However, the ships massing around Thitu, which is known as Pagasa in the Philippines, wasn't China's only provocation. Taiwan accused Beijing of sending naval ships across the median line of the Taiwan Strait, violating a long-held tacit agreement. And so, there again, last night we were discussing this, and my friend was basically saying, China never attacks anybody. They really don't. And at the same time, they do have a history of empire. If you look back, it's quite a ways back in time, not in our modern times. But there again, they look long term. They understand the art of war, and they look long term. And often, the best moves are the moves that get your objectives completed without a direct confrontation. And so what's going right now is everything is being put in line. And you have to understand that these governments are controlled by forces that are above them. It's the same thing with all the governments of the world. There's puppet masters behind all these governments that are working together, and it could be, in many cases, that the leaders of the governments don't even realize just how much they are nothing but puppets. Many of them do, and it's so fascinating when we see every single U.S. president, as soon as they have that meeting with the current president, after they've won an election, for the most part it looks like they all of a sudden age 5 to 10 years, and they have a look of fear in their face. We saw it with Trump so clearly, and it's one of those things when they get the realization, when they get prepped and they realize, their agendas are secondary to the agenda of the puppet masters that are behind the scenes doing this. And as we've talked about in so many other videos, these puppet masters, they are so above the level of what we see as the world rulers. Because, the leaders of the world are truly not the leaders of the world. In so many cases, these are just actors playing out parts. And I think we have a better picture of that now. And I think that illusion, that veil is dropping. As we talked about, we're in the apocalypse. And the apocalypse is the great unveiling when we realize, when we pull back the screen and we see the great Wizard of Oz for who he really, really is. That's what we're seeing here. But don't misunderstand that there can't be, and there are, a lot of different manipulations going on right now. And a lot of this is very disconcerting. And again, we have to let them know we're onto them. We understand what's going on, and we're not going to buy into it. So we're not going to allow ourselves to be separated, kept in fear, and kept fighting each other just so that, they can benefit, they can stay in control, they could control all the world's oil, gold, and precious metal reserves and all the power. And we're not going to put up with it anymore. We see it. We are calling it for what it is. And more people are waking up and stepping out of the matrix and realizing, hey, I've been duped. Yeah, you got one over on me in the past, but not again. Not again. We see what you are doing. We see what you are preparing, and you sell it to us. That's all sales, my friends. This is all a sales job. Caused by the insatiable greed, gluttony, and hoarding of the wealth of the world and the power in the hands of the few. And as we've said before, if you look at the Sumerian legends, the Sumerian gods, greed, ego, the need to be number one, the need to be, on the top. This is how the gods acted, quote unquote. And this is how we act. Perhaps it's in the DNA. So my friends, as always, thumbs up, support the channel. Please do subscribe. Make sure you subscribe to both Evolutionary Energy Arts 2 and the original. And share. Click the bell, get all notifications. Let's wake up, people. We have to wake up, people, before we end up finding ourselves in a worse situation, with another major war breaking out. And then we are so distracted, we are so caught up, we are so in self-survival mode that we're even more easily manipulated. So it's imperative that we wake up, people, now and not later. As always, my friends, stay safe. God bless. Namaste.